Edgar Cayce's Jesus the Pattern and Christ Consciousness. Compiled by Catherine C. Arnaud. Part 3. 1926. Now the following seems, not only to steer my mental faculties into helpful channels, but also to contain a prophecy. Moreover, it seems nearer to a direct message as to how to better teach and preach the gospel, and how and when the opportunity will be presented. My brother Edward Blumenthal died of a stroke of apoplexy. Having bursted a blood vessel. I became heartbroken over it. So terribly affected that even 140 put her arm about me to sympathize. In some way, through this tragedy to my brother, I gained a sudden prestige in the theological world, and before me appeared many sects of the Jewish faith, the Orthodox unpaneled in one partition, the Reform in another, etc. All the tribes of Israel divided into rich, poor, strict, liberal, etc., rising in tears before me, and I at their foot viewing them, teaching them, free of the barriers that hedged them in. I strove to bring them together, but many turned their faces the other way. Their inherited prejudices were too great. Then God, or the divine of God within me, directed me, and I heard the direction in that which sounded like a voice, saying, "Teach them the Father idea advanced by Christ." In this there is presented to the entity, in this emblematical form, as to how and what the death of the brother meant to the entity, and how the entity gaining, then, the full knowledge of what the death of the Savior, Redeemer, Jesus, meant to the world, and in that gaining the teaching of how same will be, should be, could be, presented to the peoples. For the various teaching as have been presented, in first the one God, rather than many gods, the just God, the all-loving God, then, that is presented in the idea as is seen in Jesus. God the Father of all those who would come to the whole oneness of purpose with that force called, or magnified in the world, and termed God, which is merely in the mind of man, that is set to represent, that all-powerful force as is manifested through the physical conditions seen in the physical world. As the entity gains those lessons, more and more will there be seen, not only as has been given as of old, first to the Jew, then to all that will hearken. Here is another viewpoint. Teach them the Father idea. What straightforward simple word, with what a deep meaning. I have felt myself, or in myself, the evolving of a new idea. The idea of Father Christ leading us to the oneness with the whole creative force. Correct. Rather that the Christ, the brother in flesh, presenting the fatherhood. Hence the brotherhood of man, and the fatherhood of God. Then our maid came in and said, "You should be close to the front door, for God may come in. He will enter that way." 137 and Ma paid little attention to her, but I perked up at once and started forward, and then the maid announced the distinguished visitor. That God was calling upon us. I rushed out into the hall and towards the door. Halfway to the door I met God and jumped for him, throwing my arms about his neck and hugging him. He embraced me. After that I noticed God's appearance. He was a tall well-built man, clean-cut and clean-shaven, wearing a brown suit and carrying a grey derby hat. He had an intelligent look, an eye that was kindly but piercing. He had an expression that was firm and features clean-cut. He was very healthy, robust, businesslike, and thorough, yet kindly, just and sincere. Nothing slouching, shuffling, maudlin, sentimental about him. A man we might say we'd like to do business with. He was God in the flesh of today. A business or industrial man, not a clergyman, not dressed in black, not a weakling, a strong healthy intelligent man, whom I recognized as the man of today, and whom I welcomed and was glad to see, and I recognized in this fine upright man. Not the ordinary. But God. Then we passed my liquor closet. It was half open. God looked in. I showed him the half-opened closet. But, I thought, I forget he is not the ordinary man he looks, but God and knows all, so I might as well show him all, as pretend anything. So I opened the closet wide for him to see. I showed him my liquor, particularly the gin which I used for cocktails. In case of sickness, I said to God. You are well prepared, God replied sarcastically. We proceeded into the parlor, where the radio was still playing and 137 and Ma amusing themselves with it. I wanted 137 and Ma to meet God, but they couldn't seem to recognize him. Of course they would not know him, I thought. How could they recognize him when they have not the faith that he did appear in the flesh long ago in Christ and that he may appear in the flesh again in just such a man as was before me? If they don't understand how God appeared in the flesh Christ, how would they recognize a flesh God today? How could they understand that the true manifestation of the true perfection within constituted the manifestation of God, whether of a man in one capacity or another? So they did not see, or at least pay any attention to him. I sat down on the sofa to converse with him. You could work harder, he said. I almost started to reply, yet bethought me that God knew all. No use. I meekly assented. You could hardly do less, he continued. How did you make out in Hupp Motors? I couldn't just say. Not so well it seemed. That is a lower purchase. A lower recommendation, isn't it? Asked God. I knew that God knew before the asking. Yes, I replied. About all you have been doing lately is lifting capital, isn't it? Said God, motioning with his thumb towards my mother. Just about, I assented. God looked toward the radio. Again some opportunity in the radio field seemed indicated. Correct. I was standing, studying the radio as God disappeared. In this there is presented to the consciousness of the entity this beautiful lesson as may be gained from this vision, this closeness of the whole force, the whole unit, the oneness of all things to this entity, and many lessons as are visioned, may be gained from this. Will entity but apply same and see, in that simple way and manner, how there has been presented to same, this entity, Morton Blumenthal, that same vision as has been given of old, as even appeared to Father Abraham in the day of the destruction of the cities in the plains. For we see in the vision as this. First, those whom should, through all physical reasoning, be able to see, comprehend and understand that which is about to take place, through the announcement of the servant, find no response in themselves of that condition. Yet the entity, through the higher concept of the oneness of all, gains through this simple announcement, even from a servant, that taking place, which is, as is seen, as has been given, even a child shall lead them. He that would be master must be servant of all, and even though the flesh is weak the spirit is willing, and the flesh must be the servant, would the greater truths be gained. In the entrance. As a man I saw as a man, I beheld as a man, in the form of, that is worshipful, yet not as a servant, but as an equal in every way and manner. Appearance, conversation, in dress, in every way and manner. For the forces as appear would make man, when man present self in the fullness of self, equal with that fullness. We will make man in our own image, and giving man, that portion of the creation, that man may become as God and one with him, even as the Son of Man in flesh appeared in the world, and made himself one with man. Yet his will, his force, his supply coming from the all-powerful force. As is seen in the various conditions as present themselves, there is seen that the conscious mind, with and through the subconscious mind, still holds sway, as to what is taking place, as to the position, as to the all-powerful visitor, able to reason, as it were, that taking place in the minds of those present in other entities, yet never realizing the importance or the blessings as are being received through the visitor. As is presented to the entity then, as the entity looks out on the physical world he finds these same physical conditions as existent in the minds and hearts of individuals of the day. That the lack of thought, the lack of quiet introspection, of that as is being presented, is that as is preventing man in the present from recognizing the force, power, manifestation, of the God, that is presenting self to man in everyday walks of life. and the recognition of all the various conditions, as through which the entity is passing, is as but viewed, and is as again, but the return of the promise, as has been said, be thou faithful and thou shalt be as the Son. For, as is seen in the recognition of the various conditions as present themselves to entity, through which the forces may be applied in every phase or walk of life, even in that of the conditions, as pertain to the physical being, and the physical actions of the individual, of the entity, there is seen that this recognition, even as taken, is taken, same as is said, not one sparrow falls to the ground, but what note is taken of same, or same be used in that variation, or that similitude of man's creative force, or of man's using that manifested force. As is seen in the radio, as the voice, as the carrying power of physical conditions in the physical world, is such that the waves of the air may transmit from one individual to another the things, the conditions, the good, the bad, that is taking place in one, how much more through the infinite forces must the cry, the pleading, of every individual, come up to the Father on high. How much more must it be then to each individual to know that when they are in attune with the infinite? How great must be that power which is set in motion to bring about the manifestations of the divine that is within, that men, others, thy brothers, may know that God is, and is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him, not as a gift that is bought, not as that of something that would take the place, but as the natural consequence of the love of the Father for his creatures, his self, his portion, that would be one with him. And as these various conditions are presented now to the entity, may he not take stock of self, and in this vision as is presented use same, with the various experiences of the servant of the one who sees not, because of the blinded eyes of self. For of the great love that is shown of the great force and power as is manifested, as through the radio, of the great good as may be seen, as even through those weaknesses, or that as is considered as of sin, that the physical may gain health, that the great conditions as are seen, all in one, is as of one, for the promise is to the faithful who do the biddings of him, who is the giver of all good and perfect gifts, for in him we live and move and have our being. The forces as are set in motion through the entity's sojourn, then, have been for the betterment of those less fortunate in many respects, as considered from the material plane. Keep the counsel of him who gave, and of him who gives, for in him is life and light, and in him is no variableness, and the way becomes brighter by this service. I saw Cayce asleep. The voice spoke and said, "You see, Morton Blumenthal. There is a Christ in each and every one of us, and the Christ speaks to us from within through the law of relativity of force. That is how this is done. As is seen in this. The voice or the inner self presents to the entity that of the living experience of the study of which the entity has given much time, thought and study. For this is as a truth, and the more the entity studies along this line of presented thought, the greater, better, bigger concept there will be gained of the living Christ in the lives, hearts, of men, and the manner of his spirit dwelling within the earth's plane, and through same may a greater concept be gained by the entity of the issues of life. Then, study and study and study. To make these corrections for the mental conditions is to so fill the mental forces of the body with that plenteous love of the Master and his oneness with the Father, that there is found no place for the entrance of that which would beguile, or make weak, or make afraid. For, as has been given, let that mind be in you which was in Jesus, the Christ, who took no thought of the morrow, for the morrow brings forth the evil sufficient unto itself, who made his life of no estate, that others might know the love and the fatherhood of God, that he, the Christ, might become the living way, the approach to the Father. And what thou asketh in my name, believing, ye shall have. If ye love me, keep my commandments, and I will come and dwell in thine own heart. That is, I will so fill your mind, your mental forces with the good, until all else shall be driven away. This, then, is the correction of the mental forces of this entity, or any other entity. Let that mind be in you which was in Jesus. As regards the philosophical phase, I have been asked many times to explain the resurrection of Christ in terms of my concept, embraced in the book I am writing on spirit action. Many are the ideas presented to me. Among them that the Christ was taken from the cross before death and thus appeared as one resurrected. Explain not so much the emblematical meaning of the resurrection as to the possibilities of the one Spirit Father being able to manifest itself in physical form of flesh man, even when the entity of that flesh man has gained complete perfection and a complete concept, such as manifested in the Christ, when that flesh man has reached the point of complete dissolution, as it is written in the scriptures of Christ had reached before resurrection. I ask this question that it may help me to complete the concept and to answer those who put the question to me. In this there is presented that which the entity may gain the full concept of, in this one sentence. As in Adam all die, so in Christ all is made alive. As to the conception of the resurrection, there are many presentations in the physical world of man's concept of same. For to understand the resurrection, we must first gain a concept of how the spirit force entered into the body and man became a living soul. For we begin first as this. The earth and the universe, as related to man, came into being through the mind of the maker. And, as such, has its same being much as each atomic force multiplies in itself, or, as worlds are seen, and being made in the present period. And as same became, earth we are speaking of, an abode for man entered as man, through the mind of the maker in the form of flesh man, that which carnally might die, decay, become dust, entering into material conditions. The Spirit, the gift of God, that man might be one with him, with the concept of man's creative forces throughout the physical world. Man, in Adam, as a group, not as an individual, entered into the world. For he entered in 5 places at once called Adam and one. And as man's concept became to that point, wherein man walked not after the ways of the Spirit, but after the desires of the flesh. Sin entered. That is, away from the face of the Maker. And death then became man's portion, spiritually. For the physical death existed from the beginning. For to create, one must die. In this, then, there is seen, as the body, in the flesh, of the Christ, became perfect in the flesh, in the world, and the body laid aside on the cross, in the tomb, the physical body moved away, through that as man will know as dimensions. And the Spirit able then to take hold of that being in the way as it enters again into the body, and as it presents itself to the world, to individuals at the time, and to man at present. I dreamed I awakened and contemplated the General Motor dream. I reasoned as follows, General Motors. Yes, but to what price? Oh yes. 170. Then the market grew duller reacted. How, when does it do this? Then I beheld a skeleton of my own body talking out loud to myself, indicating in words as I often do, in making myself a third person talking to myself. Yet in this case, that which was said to me was not of my saying, or of my control, although it became part of my consciousness by virtue of putting myself under this other control, and although I had, of my own volition, indicated that said to me, in the physical manner I had so talked to myself while awake, yet now, my body or sensuous mind was gaining this knowledge from a divine power of mind. That is, my skeleton spoke to me saying, that is enough for you to know. Meaning, I believe, that for the present General Motors will go to 170, and other rails and good stocks up also. After this happens the Lord will tell you what will happen. Enough for the present, that you are told this. I reasoned, that voice is loud. I guess I am talking in my sleep, and the voice is talking to me so loud and distinct, that it will awaken the folks. I felt like an ingrate and proceeded to thank my good father for his goodness, gifts, etc., to me. The voice in the form of my own skeleton, I could see the teeth and jawbones move, took hold again saying, that is all unnecessary. The way to thank the Father is to continue just as you are doing, by making your body, my own skeleton, that I was seeing, a means by which this power may manifest, whether as regards physical, mental, spiritual, financial or whatnot. That is sufficient. Then I did actually awaken and found no loud voice had disturbed anyone. I did some thinking and reasoned that Christ exemplified to the world the divinity of man and the process by which man in this upside-down divine form, material, became possessed for and of himself of this divinity. My message constitutes this explanation, and to accomplish this, I must merely be the vehicle for such an expression or explanation by the one who is my authority, the divine power of Father, for such expression. For then I may, like Christ, claim him for my authority, and also like Christ demonstrate the truth of this to those who have the mind's eyes to see and hear. That is, understand and gain for themselves a consciousness of like divine relationship. Correct. This, just that as has been outlined in the various visions and passed by the entity, and of the conditions that come about before and since these visions, or this understanding has been gained by the entity, in its body and mental consciousness as respecting to various phases of consciousness, of mental mind, of the body mind, of the subconscious mind. And of these being one in all and all in one, and in the manifestation of same, as is man's will power, or man's or the entity's power in relation to these same conditions, and how same may be manifested before men, whether that of stocks, bonds, individuals, homes, peoples, monies, cities, or whatnot. All being of that one force, in its one way, to manifest that divine force as has been exemplified through the Christ, and through the individuals who make themselves one with the Father. For, as is seen in each individual lives as are seen or manifested in the earth plane. Each entity sets that as the ideal, or that as the criterion, and works to that one. In that of the Christ life, God, the Father, made that ideal, and that life spent in manifesting that ideal before men, same as this entity, Morton Blumenthal, may manifest that same ideal, that oneness with the Father, and thus magnify that name. None above or beneath, or in the broad ways may no other, than the Father lives in those who would seek to do his, the Father's, biddings in the earth's plane.